We have seen the cryptocurrency market, including the majority of altcoins, recover significantly over the past day. The daily shows that XLM is up almost 12%, HBAR is up nearly 9%, Ethereum is up 4%, XRP is up nearly 8%, and Algo is up 8.5%. The altcoin market is seeing a pleasant upturn. Even if we include Bitcoin, it has been fluctuating by roughly 2% today. Additionally, we are still in the red on the weekly if we look at it. Even though we still have a lot of work to do, some altcoins are beginning to bounce significantly today, and those pleasant benefits have persisted even in the past hour. The key query at hand is whether this is merely a dead cat bounce. Will we have that significant breakout, or will we decline? I'm actually going to go over a few topics in this video, and I'll provide you guys with my thought process. However, the strength of Bitcoin should be the primary focus, right? Our attention is still on Bitcoin. I am aware of how unpleasant it is for you all to hear me say that. However, Bitcoin remains the primary motivator in this case. Ethereum is still unquestionably in second position. I do believe that a significant change in the market will occur when Ethereum begins to break over $4,000. However, XRP is back above $3. Ethereum is above 3,500, and Bitcoin is about 115K. We adore witnessing it. SUI is $3.50, HBR is about 25 cents, and XLM is up to 41+ cents. So, nothing much has changed. We continue to linger at some lower levels of price movement. The good news is that most of the space's market capitalization has significantly increased. We can also observe the significant increase on the 100 index if we check at the market capitalization, which is 3.73 trillion. These are the top 100 cryptocurrencies. However, the market as a whole is rebounding from some notable lows today, which we adore. About 52, fear and greed. Additionally, we could observe that anxiety and greed spiked from a low of about 48 to 52. Not too horrible. Again, I'm primarily watching, and I have no idea why this screen is so broken. Let's get started. Therefore, my primary focus was on the market's performance here and how much we had actually recovered from the lows. We reached roughly 3.62 trillion. So, to reiterate, there was no significant market decline or anything of the sort. We have so far increased the market capitalization of cryptocurrency by more than $100 billion. Still, this is a good spike. The majority of altcoins are up in the same range as XRP, which is up 7.7%. This bounce has been excellent thus far, However, the question is whether this is really a rebound, or if there will be a far more significant breakout for cryptocurrencies as a whole. Well, just a little glance at a couple of items. For some of these cryptocurrency ventures, the volume today has been rather noteworthy. The two that stand out the most are of course Bitcoin and Ethereum. However, if we examine the 24-hour volume on XRP, for instance, it is more over $5.50 billion. Again, stable currencies are the primary driver here, so that's fairly substantial, especially when we compare it to some of these steady coins. It appears that XRP's volume is actually beginning to rise. XLM, approximately $500 million, nearly $1 billion. SUI, then, if we examine HBR, roughly $423 million. Thus, there has been a good amount of trade activity overall. The primary thing that I'm finally waiting for today is, the only thing I will caution everyone against, is concentrating too much on Bitcoin alone. We're going into Monday, stocks. As we begin this new week, the primary attention is on stocks. I do believe that the response we see on the S&P will have a huge impact on cryptocurrency and the events that transpire this week. Jim Cramer's bearishness, which is usually an inverse indicator, is well known. We should therefore be bullish when he is bearish. I find it hilarious that he is truly pessimistic about both August and September. However, I'm keeping an eye on things to see whether we make a significant recovery. The candle from Friday has already begun to show a pleasant little bounce. The primary focus of my analysis is whether a violent recovery will begin to occur here, as that is what we are desperately awaiting. As of right now, there hasn't been much of a shift in stock futures when comparing the S&P. It is roughly 6,280. Our current position is 6,238. Nothing too crazy then. The Dow is up 0.2% or so. So, nothing out of the ordinary there either. Also 0.3% for Nasdaq. Therefore, once more, the futures side of the market has not seen any significant changes. However, I do believe that from here, the S&P may also begin to experience a significant rebound. Listen, this wasn't a huge decline, but the S&P market saw a significant decline, and we are currently in that demand zone. During the live stream last week, I briefly discussed it, and I also discussed it when we were just about to turn positive. In any case, I was mostly hoping for a retest of this demand zone, which we currently have. If we go back to that sell-off into, say, early July, Monday and Tuesday were both rather dull, and then we started to have that recovery, and we didn't really break out until the week after. The question here is how long it takes for this to really bounce back. Is it possible that this week will be a dull one, in which we first sort of chop a little bit here, and then move on to next week, when we actually begin to see that major break to the upside? I would want to see a significant recovery this week, but it may certainly be that dull. We must wait and see, of course, but I'm going into this week with a little more of an eye on equities than simply Bitcoin, you know. However, I will mention one thing I'm following on Bitcoin, which I've already covered in a number of movies on my channel. In fact, I also discussed this during the live webcast. We were primarily looking for a break from the lows of about 112k in order to target the 117k zone, you know. I do believe that Bitcoin will begin a violent recovery as soon as we have a daily close above this 117k zone. Why am I saying that? Well, since we'll be getting a lot of help again starting in July, we clung to this important support. On July 31st, we eventually lost it, which is why we experienced a significant decline back down to 112k. Therefore, I'm keeping an eye out for a possible retest, a lovely little dip back down to this, similar to July 25th WAC, followed by the huge break to 120k, a retest to 117k, a hold of support, and then the big break to 130k. Additionally, we might surpass 117k without ever rejecting it, aiming for 120k, retesting at 117k, and then exploding upwards. However, regardless of what transpires, I anticipate that we will meet the 130k goal price for Bitcoin, most likely around August, depending on how violent things get. Listen, the market saw a significant decline on June 22nd. If we're looking at the time frame here, it was 22 days starting on June 22nd. We had to decrease all the way down to about 98.2k in 22 days, and then we ran up to 123k. If we consider that Bitcoin price rise, it was a 25 point, or about 5% increase. I believe that 130k is rather conservative for this violent rebound, and 22 days off the low, which would take us right to about August 24th, if we're talking about 25.5% being the next big move that might occur. Therefore, in August we might see a goal price of $130,000 for Bitcoin, which would be extremely significant for the markets. However, I do believe that the recuperation is off to a great start. Now, as I mentioned, my initial goal is 117k. It would be great if we could overcome that and get Bitcoin's strength back. According to the Bitcoin liquidation heat map, I do believe that as soon as we start to break above 115k, we will see liquidations supporting the price's rise to 117k, because we can see that there is a significant amount of leverage in this range that will help us drive the price higher. We'll have to wait and see what transpires, but there is undoubtedly a lot of leverage in this sector that might serve as the catalyst for us to move up to 117k, or even 120k. Because if we surpass 117k, there isn't much leverage left to rely on in relation to Bitcoin. Once again, it's most likely about 120k. In fact, we examine this to get a sense of where we would be on this chart. Let me quickly zoom out. Therefore, I would suggest